are Bob Bordone and Tim Masselink. Bob's an internationally recognized expert on negotiation and mediation. He is a senior fellow at Harvard Law School and principal and founder of the Cambridge Negotiation Institute. He served as the Thaddeus R. Beale Clinical Professor of Law at Harvard Law School for more than 2 decades. Tim Masselink is co-author of a book on negotiation skills and formerly a senior consultant at the consultancy Berenschot. Currently, he is managing director at a company called Influence. Both reflect on trust as a key factor in negotiations and talk about the skill needed to be an effective negotiator. Your guest today, Severin DeWitt.
Bob and Tim, welcome at Trust Talk. You are both experts in the art of negotiation. Let's kick off with what seems like a logical question. Why is it that establishing trust is critical to achieve success in any negotiation?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me, and good to see both of you. And I'm so curious to hear Tim's thoughts on this. I think from my perspective, trust is, I would say, incredibly helpful and almost necessary for negotiation. It certainly makes negotiations much easier. I would not go so far as to say that even when there's no trust, we shouldn't try to negotiate. But part of what makes trust useful and trust really helpful in a negotiation is that negotiation is really about future performance, things that we are saying that we will do or will refrain from doing, having a sense of belief that the other will follow through on whatever those things are, whether it's as simple as paying me for my car or as complex as withdrawing troops over a complicated schedule from a contested area. The more I have some sense that you will actually follow through, that what you say is what you mean, that what you say your red lines are what your red lines really are, the easier it is for me to share real information about my preferences, my beliefs, what I can or cannot do. And so whenever possible, we want to do the things that would help us build trust in a negotiation. There's a line that one of my mentors, Roger Fisher, who wrote Getting to Yes and was really the founder of negotiation as a major field in the United States. He actually founded the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School. He would say that you don't want to be wholly trusting in negotiation, but you want to be wholly trustworthy.
If I can respond to that, Bob, thank you so much also for having me, Severin, and also thank you for being with us, Bob. So from my side, I really agree with what Bob said, and you could even maybe make a distinction between like trust in the negotiation process and trust in negotiators themselves. So I think both are very helpful because trust in the process, it kind of gives a process a legitimacy to it. If people trust that it's a fair negotiation process. But on the side of the negotiators, I would say that if you are viewed as not a trustworthy or a credible actor, it's very difficult to negotiate because everything you say basically will be doubted. People will not trust you. So even if you are right, it still comes with like a little bitter taste of is it really true what they're saying or not? And that in turn will make it very difficult for you to get to results.
In preparation for this interview, I tried to read as much as I could to discover what role trust plays in negotiations. I have to say that's a Herculean task. So many books, so many articles, so many advices, TED Talks, you name it. Bob, to start with you, in 2005 you wrote a book with Michael L. Moffitt on dispute resolution. It's called The Handbook of Dispute Resolution. That intrigued me because the words negotiation, conflict resolution and mediation are often mentioned in one breath with trust. What have those three in common?
I think of negotiation as being the umbrella of almost all things in life. This is what you get when you talk to a negotiation professor, right? But negotiation I define as just any intention, any effort, any set of communications with an intention to influence or to persuade. So embedded under negotiation are things like dispute resolution or conflict resolution or mediation in my mind, because all of those tasks in some way are around trying to influence behavior. Negotiation is bigger than that, right? Negotiation includes both making deals and helping people resolve conflicts or helping people manage disputes in some way. But I think they connect in many respects. And in fact, really skillful mediators or facilitators of processes, so people like Tim, for example, can often help parties make a conflict or a dispute into a deal. Because one of the things that's quite interesting is so often part of the reason why they're in conflict, of course, is a disagreement about substantive terms. But another reason why they're in conflict, going back to this idea of trust, right, is that people have acted in ways that have breached trust.
Yeah.
And part of sometimes what a good mediator or a good facilitator of conflict can do is help unearth those deeper dynamics and help parties repair in a way that helps them rebuild trust and actually find ways to build synergies and, again, not only resolve a dispute, but sometimes actually build a deal from it.
I have a question to Tim. Can you predict an individual's ability to negotiate effectively? One would wonder whether some traits are clearly indicative of good negotiation potential, while others are more of a handicap.
Well, we always had the discussion at the Klingendahl Institute whether or not being a good negotiator was more of something of a science or more of an art form. Because, you can actually improve your skills in negotiation, for example. But on the other hand, if you see like really effective negotiators, sometimes they can intervene in ways that for other people, you're completely surprised by what they do and the things they do. So there is also a bit of an art to it. But
what do you mean by intervene?
The things they say to capture people, for example, or to inspire people. I've been part in many negotiation processes where someone says something and for a moment everybody's scared, like, oh, can you say that? And then suddenly it has an incredibly powerful effect on getting towards an agreement, for example, especially in the conflict areas I used to work. But if you really look at the science and at the skills of a negotiator, then yes, there are absolutely some skills that are crucial, I would say. So, for example, empathy would be my number one skill for a good negotiator. But credibility is a strong second, that you're being viewed as a trustworthy and credible actor. And steadfastness too, so that you are also strong in the moments that you need to be strong to the other parties, but also to your own constituents and base. Because sometimes you have to make a deal and the people you represent, they expect a lot from you. And then when you come back to them, you have to explain that they might not get everything that they wanted. So at those moments, you also have to be quite strong and firm and really stand behind the deal you made with other parties.
Trust seems particularly elusive in big stress, high stakes conditions, as when you're negotiating with strangers, facing deadlines, coping with differences in power and status, or hammering out unenforceable contracts. So, Bob, what are your experiences in those situations?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, one of the things that I would always say, you mentioned, negotiating with strangers. And I would say whenever possible, I would want to do some things to build some relationship, if I can, in advance. Obviously, in a negotiation where I'm buying a car, I'm probably not going to invest a huge amount of time and energy to become friends with the car dealer. But in longer term kinds of negotiations, maybe if there's going to be a joint venture, for example, thinking about, are there some ways that we can get to know each other? I think the other thing that I would say, and this is, again, where trust really is important, is if I know I'm going to begin a negotiation with somebody that is a stranger, I'll probably do some research. If it's a lawyer in Berlin and I know a few lawyers in Berlin, I might call them up. Do you know this person, right? I'll do some research on the internet, right? What is their reputation? What outside interests do they have that I can try to create some kind of connection with them? That's something that I really want to do. Tim?
Yeah, I just want to add to that because in the Netherlands there's a saying. I'm going to say it in English. I'm not sure if it works, but it's like trust. It comes by foot and it leaves by horse. And what it means is that, especially when you meet new people, for example, it's slow steps in building the trust. So you cannot, if one negotiator would immediately share everything, probably the other side would distrust them. They would be a bit confused. As why do you share that with me? We hardly know each other. And so you build a little bit of trust along the way, and then as long as that's being reciprocated, you work towards bigger and bigger engagements, I would say. However, if someone breaks the trust, it can be that it will be very difficult to reach an agreement. And sometimes, adding to Bob's point on persuasion, what you see in the Dutch cultural context is that we tend to view negotiations a little bit as a debate. So we try to convince the other side that I am right and you are wrong. And if you do not agree with me, it means that you don't understand my point and I have to explain it again to you. And that sometimes has a bit of a challenge for the trust, especially when you negotiate with different actors, where people sometimes really have a different opinion or a different idea. And then explaining it again does not really help. So trust is also, I think, about listening and understanding where a person is coming from, rather than just convincing and sharing your own story.
Risk and trust, 2 words, 2 elements in almost all negotiations. So how do they relate to each other?
I mean, I think there's a big connection between the two. Of course, part of what you're trying to do in a negotiation is, I think, reduce the risk of exploitation to yourself or whoever it is you're representing. At the same time, of course, by dint of the negotiation, right, you are also trying to create some value with the other side. So one of the ways of reducing risk is the more I feel that there is trust with my counterpart, the less risky it is for me to share information about my preferences. The less risky it is for me to engage in a joint venture with them. And, one of the things I always say is when I'm teaching negotiation is that there are a lot of things in the world that we humans can't control. And certainly the last year has really shown us that. Because if you would have said 2 years ago, on your list of worries is a global pandemic, where does a global pandemic rank? I would have said it's not on the list. Right. So we know that humans, we can't control so much. But one thing we have some ability to control when things in the world go bad, whether it's a pandemic or a recession or a war or a weather event, is how the person on the other side of the negotiation table will act when these unpredictable things happen. And the more trust, the more we have a good relationship, the more we've worked cooperatively, the more I know that when something really bad happens, they're not going to act to exploit me, but we're going to instead act to try to be supportive and helpful of each other. So those are my thoughts. I'm curious what you'd have to say, Tim.
Yeah, I really like it. And I think that I like the point that the relationship is very important here. That you, what we call the shadow of the future, the fact that we may in the future also work together has an impact on how we behave at the moment in the negotiation. So to give you an example, with like good colleagues, if you can share the risk quite easily, because if you get sick, they can replace you and vice versa. Whereas if the relationship is not there, the risk is also bigger, of course, because you don't know what the future holds. And I think that, as Bob, you mentioned, like if you are going to buy a car, that you will behave differently probably than if you have a long-term relationship or long-term negotiation with someone. I think the same holds true for a risk management. That if you do not know the person very well, you behave differently than if you have a long-term relationship or if you will negotiate quite a couple of times in the future.
I love examples. I mean,
Yeah.
This is the subject. This is the subject where there are multiple examples. You wrote a book, Tim, together with Maarten van Rossum, top negotiators, or in Dutch, top onderhandelaars, in which you deal with a lot of real-time situations.
Bob wrote the preface.
Oh, yes, he did.
Forward,
he did. One of the things I like about the subject of today's interview is that it is full of examples, like I said.
Yeah.
So is your book.
Yeah.
I would love to hear a few of those, where, especially those where trust made the difference.
Yeah, we just had a very interesting example of the impact of trust in negotiations here in the Netherlands. Maybe you know, but we recently had elections and several parties are trying to form a coalition government now. So without going too much into detail, it just so happened that one of the key facilitators of that negotiation was photographed. And on the picture, you could read some very compromising notes on a particular member of parliament. So the confidentiality of the negotiation was completely gone. And with that also the trust between the parties, because they were all looking at each other like, oh, who wrote that? Who said that about that person? And then one of the parties got the blame. And after that, it became incredibly difficult to form a coalition because suddenly the one party was really like the bad guy. The others didn't want to cooperate with them. But unfortunately, you have to cooperate to get to a coalition, to get a government. So I think that's a very powerful example on how confidentiality is so crucial sometimes in negotiations, because it allows people to trust each other that would, if you would do it in the open or on television or whatever, would never be so keen to trust each other. And so we have not really talked about like the confidentiality part of trust, but to me, it is especially in complex, difficult, emotional negotiations, the confidentiality is really one of the key factors in whether or not it will be successful.
I totally agree with that. Tim, your point is so well taken, right? And I think that relates so much to, again, the existence of trust. And it's something that I think has really eviscerated in the age of social media, in the age of, kind of got you politics. I can remember, this is now when President Obama was president, I remember he had called in Republicans and Democrats into the Oval Office for a meeting. It was around the healthcare issues in the United States. And immediately afterwards, literally when then Senator McCain was standing in the driveway of the White House, on the White House grounds, he started to talk about everything that was discussed in the Oval Office. And I thought, you can't negotiate under circumstances like that. And I think that this is something that is sometimes confounding to people, at least in the U.S. context, and I wonder also whether in the Netherlands, this idea of, well, we want transparency.
Everyone,
transparency sounds like a good idea, and of course, transparency is a good idea. On the other hand, complete transparency does not work in negotiation. We need to be able to get into a room and talk about some things with some confidence that you're not going to be broadcasting, tweeting it immediately.
Yeah, I fully agree. And I really like that you raised the point about transparency, because it seems to be like something that is like the highest objective almost at the moment. We want like radical transparency. And for negotiations, it just doesn't work like that, because people represent people. So you have to, if it's recorded, if it's on camera, what will happen is that the negotiators, they will actually turn more towards their base, towards the constituents, than towards each other, because they have to look strong and ready for battle, so to say. And one thing that also comes to mind is in this age with a lot of virtual negotiations, which I know Bob also does a lot of work with. We recently had some EU negotiations with all the EU country leaders via virtual negotiations. And interestingly enough, they were basically completely useless, the negotiations, because people were not willing to compromise or to come together at all. And one of the reasons for that has to do with trust, because it's a bit cynical maybe, but through Zoom or through any other problem, you don't know who else is in the room, for example. So you don't know if we are in this call with the three of us, or maybe there are 5 other people standing outside of the reach of the camera,
or recorded, yeah,
or it's being recorded, and you say something silly, for example, and suddenly everybody hears about that. So what happens, and that's interesting to look at the effects. I think that actually parties become reluctant to move towards a deal and keep basically very close to their original positions. So you're not moving forward. You're just re-emphasizing the things you find important and talk a lot, but nothing gets done. I'm also interested to hear Bob's views on this, actually.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, I totally agree with you. And there's all this really interesting research on virtual negotiation. Even when so certainly the idea that we don't really know who's in the room, but even if we could assure that, there's this research that people tend to be less trusting over Zoom. People are less good at reading the emotional cues, even though they're looking at their face, right? Because the level of pixelation is lower. There's a time delay. It's also easier to just dig in when we're not face to face, and people do that. There's also research that there is a higher level of what's called a misattribution of intent. So we are more apt to, over Zoom or email, assume that the other person's intentions were bad, even if they weren't. And, we probably all have experiences of, you get that email from somebody and you're like, what is this, right? And then you start showing it to your friends like, oh, and you read a story into it. Whereas if we were in person, I could tell from your facial cues and your tone, and I could maybe ask you a follow-up question, and I don't have the time to reflect on how terrible and person you are, right? And so these are really big challenges for all of the ways in which technology, even today, is enabling the three of us to have this wonderful conversation that would have been much harder without it.
Yeah.
As negotiators, we need to be really thoughtful about when do we really put in the time, energy, and effort to see each other in person, to kind of build the relationship, to promote kind of trust, creativity. Yeah. So I'm totally with you on that, Tim.
And one thing from my personal experience in facilitating negotiations in the last couple of months, especially with large groups, is something what strikes me very fascinating. That people now tend to turn off the cameras or tend to turn off the microphones during negotiations when it's not their turn, for example. And so they go out for a cup of coffee. Maybe they are looking at their emails. I don't know, but you lose kind of the engagement from people in the process a little bit. And so it's very easy to step out of a virtual negotiation much more than it would be than to step out of a room where you're all sitting and someone is talking. You're kind of forced to listen to them. But with this, with the little button we have now that you can just put our screens on black, you miss kind of the engagement that the investment basically that people need to come to a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I have had the same experience, right? And even right now, I mean, our listeners don't know this, but I had some trouble with my camera today. So I have the benefit of looking at both of you, but neither of you have the benefit of looking at me.
And you only see a big B. We see a big B from Bob.
Yeah, you see a big B, but that's much harder for you, right? I'm getting this benefit. I mean, you'll just have to trust me that I'm looking straight at both of you.
This is all trust.
It is trust. You have to trust you that. But I think the other thing, right, even the most well-intentioned negotiator in a big, as you said, in a big space, right, when you're on that screen, emails are popping up, texts are popping up, right? In a way that's just really different if we're around a conference room. The phone goes in our pocket, the dog isn't barking in the background. And these are real factors for sure.
Yeah,
I love to come with an example that I got from Charlie Green. He mentioned a quote from a Harvard Business Review article called "Competent Jerks, Lovable Fools, and the Formation of Social Networks." We all like a lovable, competent person, but is there a way an incompetent, lovable person can achieve something in negotiations where a really competent jerk cannot?
Well, I'm going to say yes to that question only because a few things, right? I mean, I'll be curious to hear Tim's thoughts on this. One is, I'm somebody who believes that we all have different skill levels and abilities. So that is to say, even somebody who is low skilled, I would never quite call incompetent. They may not be the best at something, but in negotiation, there's so many skills that matter. How do you frame things? How do you prepare? As Tim was saying earlier, are you a good listener? What is your ability to be assertive effectively? What is your ability to be creative? Those are just a few of the skills that really matter. And so certainly, like when I'm coaching a client, right, sometimes I'll be like, okay, this person is not the Serena Williams of negotiators, right? This person is not the best negotiator. On the other hand, I'm going to your point, Severin, if, right, they are kind of good-willed and open, right, I'm going to call that lovable, we have some things to work with. I could probably get them to improve in some domains that are meaningful and get some things done. So I would never call anyone completely hopeless as a negotiator.
Yeah, and
Tim, I see you smiling.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, I think maybe incompetent goes too far, but I look at my daughters who are very lovable and maybe not extremely competent yet in some of the, in like language, for example, because they are 2 and 1. But they are extremely good negotiators when they negotiate with me. So, this morning we had a negotiation. It's raining outside this morning in The Hague. And my daughter of 2 years old, she wants to go outside without a jacket, and we really have a negotiation on whether or not she should put on her jacket. And I just barely win that, because she's very insistent and very lovable. It's very difficult to negotiate.
But to her, you didn't seem too trustworthy, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, I have a question to you. In an earlier interview, I heard you saying, anywhere there is more than one person, there is room for some conflict. Isn't that a very pessimistic view of life?
I love this question because you are doing something that, by the way, 99% of people would also do, which is presuming that conflict is bad. And I don't think conflict is necessarily bad. I think conflict poorly handled is bad. But I think whenever have more than a single person in the room, actually, sometimes even when you are all by yourself, there could be conflict, right? Because we have internal conflicts. But I think of conflict, right, as difference in opinion, difference in preference, difference in how we should do something. And unless you have a literally, photocopy version of yourself, right? You have cloned yourself, or you're with the most boring person in the world, there's going to be some differences. And so to me, so I think where I'll challenge you, Severin, is just the notion that the conflict is bad, right? I would be like, no, the conflict is what makes life interesting. It's what allows us to have different exchanges and preferences. Now the question is, what are our skills and capabilities and courage to actually handle that well? And that's where things can go south if we're not kind of well trained and competent and conflict aware.
Yeah. As we have only very limited time, but I would like to have one more subject that I'd like to present to you both, and that's about the difference between men and women. If we talk about the art of negotiating, I wondered whether there is a difference between men and women, because MIT professor Susskind said in an interview with the Harvard Daily blog, and I quote, "Women are more likely to be successful when they frame their pitch in reference to benefits to others rather than themselves." What do you think of that?
I think there's some research done, very interesting, also on, for example, men and women who apply for the same position, and they're both acting assertive, and they are being reviewed differently. The behaviors reviewed differently when men are displaying it or when women displaying it. So, just very short. If a man if a man asks for more money, for example, for more compensation, he's perceived as a strong or assertive or a good negotiator. And a woman who asks for the same things can sometimes be perceived as unfriendly or maybe even a little bit rude, that she is making a problem. So that is not, I would say, a problem of women, but a problem of the whole system that we're in. And this changes, and that's interesting in terms of your question, Severin. When a woman is not negotiating on her own behalf, but as a representative of a group, for example, her family, that effect completely disappears. So then she suddenly is being perceived as a good negotiator. However, I think still there is an issue that the behavior has a different evaluation in men and women.
Yeah, and I would just absolutely agree with Tim, right? With this dynamic that Tim is talking about, right? There's all this research on what's called gender backlash. Yeah. And I think what Larry Susskind is really talking about there is it's really an unfortunate piece of strategic advice to women, right? When I say unfortunate, it is unfortunate that in order to be able to achieve their goals, they have to reframe them in collective terms instead of individualistic terms. So the real goal, right, would be to kind of change the kind of systemic biases and cultural norms that are causing this gender backlash. But what Susskind, I think, is really advising there is, in the meantime, if you frame things as it would be really great to get this resource for our team, it would support all the work we do, that lands better than I need another job. I need another person on my team, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I have to feel, Bob and Tim, that we only scratched the surface of the subject on negotiations. There is so much, I guess, we could still talk about. We have to, however, given the time, leave it with this. I'm very appreciative of you being available. It was a very interesting interview, I think, and thank you very much for your insights, and wish you both well in your profession and personal life.
Thank you, Severin.
Thanks, Severin, and as always, Tim. It's always fun to chat with you as well.
Yes, likewise.
So thanks to both of you.
So it was a pleasure, and thank you so much for asking us in your podcast, Severin.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Trust Talk. We would be very grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Stitcher. Don't miss out on future travels around trust, and subscribe to this channel or visit us on our website, trusttalk.co, or on Twitter @trusttalkco. We look forward to seeing you again.